So for a long time the terms countering violent extremism and prevention seems to fit in the same category. But since the term countering violent extremism, or CVE for short, was not really defined by certain communities, there was a lot of pushback towards this approach of CVE, because it seemed to tend very much to the hard responses, to intervening at an earlier stage, not so much by soft approaches, but rather with repressive criminal approaches in an earlier stage of preparing the act. So, for instance, if people were radicalizing on the internet, to intervene there, or to prosecute them at an earlier stage for conspiracy, for preparation of terrorism, etc. And it almost seems that governments were starting to act as a thought police. So that's why came the new term of preventing violent extremism, to kind of make the difference between the two. Prevention now being even at an earlier stage, and very much more on soft approaches, on building resilience, on helping people if they feel marginalized or discriminated upon, or having lack of socio-economic possibilities to overcome these hurdles in order to kind of deviate their otherwise trajectory towards violent extremism. I think the idea is that you need it all. So you need a comprehensive approach that has both measures targeted on legislation, on security issues, and on prevention. And depending on what stage people are in their trajectory of radicalization, or whether or not they're already crossing the line, the threshold toward what is considered a criminal behavior. Of course, in that respect, you then come with your repressive and punitive approaches. That should be absolutely clear, because we don't condone these kind of acts, and there shouldn't be any impunity. But at the same time, you have to reserve that for the measures for the last resort. There is this whole trajectory before that where you can intervene with all kinds of other actions. And the idea also within Europe, within the European Union, and not yet in all European countries, but in more and more European countries are working towards that one works towards this comprehensive approach where all these different strands are included in. Now, the EU has its counterterrorism strategy, which looks into the security issues, the criminalization of certain acts, harmonization of legislation, also the repressive side, but also has this one pillar on prevention. The problem is a little bit that they cannot enforce that kind of measures on the member states. So they invite them and encourage them, but it's really up to the member states to decide whether or not they are adopting these kind of prevention strategies. And so far, unfortunately, there are still a couple of European countries who don't have comprehensive strategies at all, and where also, when one talks about prevention, they automatically say, yes, we are intervening earlier with repressive measures. So they're still falling into that trap, whereas real prevention is about trust building, about resilience in society, about engagement with different stakeholders. And that's very hard. Don't make the mistake, the soft approach is actually very hard. There are good examples, and of course I'm most familiar with the Dutch system, where we do have comprehensive strategies, where there are systems where and models where all stakeholders are sitting around the table. It's government, it's semi-government, including education, youth services, mental health services, and also just plain citizens sometimes, who play a key figure in noticing what is going on in their neighborhoods. So that's a good example where they develop a view on what is a very tailor-made intervention mechanisms. The same goes for our system. which is also very famous for their very broad and approach that really starts at an early stage with all kinds of prevention strategies. Other member states of the European Union might also have strategies or measures that are targeted towards prevention. Some also have received quite some criticism because it's enforcing that kind of approach, and there is no voluntary participation, for instance, or the way that these strategies have been drafted are stigmatizing certain communities, which is then backfiring upon the real objectives of what you're looking for. So, but I just talked about the Dutch system. It's not without criticism. We have to make that clear. We are constantly learning on what works and what doesn't and what can be improved. For one thing, I think it's important to make sure that you have a form of community policing, where the police force is not only perceived as the repressive agent that they sometimes also have to be, but it's also a person that you know in your neighborhood that you can trust and that you can approach without becoming the subject of an investigation immediately after. And unfortunately there are so many examples all over the world where the police is someone that you run away from, even if you have nothing to hide for. But because they are corrupted or otherwise are not your ally in the things that you run into in your society. So the community policing is one, making sure that you have multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder platforms where you exchange information, make sure that you get a very complete picture of the people that you are talking about. Those things are very important, and that should also contribute to trust building in society, which is very good for resilient societies. Well, I think that they have a manual now coming out soon that's going to be presented by the Radicalization Awareness Network that is tailored to the problem of reach your knees. But again, this is a manual, this is offered, this is not a model that has to be followed. And so far, what seems to be the problem is that there are objectives and ambitions, but not necessarily a follow-up. It's also hard because the way that we look at this problem and the lesson that we have drawn from the past is that you always have to be context specific. There are some common features, criteria or indicators that you see a repetition of, you see appearing in different environments, but at the same time the cocktail of all these indicators is different in each context. So you can give some guidelines, but at the same time you have to be able to come up with a tailor-made approach in each and every city. And hopefully through the networks that are built, at least cities know that they should exchange their information and make sure that the good practices are shared, and hopefully we can learn lessons from that. But there is not a one-size-fits-all model, unfortunately.